When we give our time, our energy, our resources, we're participating in the ongoing work of God's provision. And we're expressing our gratitude in action. We're saying, God, you've given me enough to share. You see, generosity is not loss, it's joy. It's living open-handed because we trust the one who provides. Welcome to this episode of the Jesus in a Tragic World podcast with Greg Faulls. This is Greg Faulls here, and I hope that our time with each other in the coming moments will help you find fuller life in relationship with God, yourself, and others. Welcome to the Jesus in a Tragic World podcast. Today, we're diving into something essential for your spiritual health: gratitude. Not just as a response, but as a discipline that shapes your soul, especially in hard times. As Thanksgiving draws near, let's explore how choosing gratitude can deepen your relationship with God, renew your perspective, and transform how you live, even in a broken world. In this podcast, we'll be reminded how to live well by giving thanks, even in a tragic world. Thanksgiving is here again, and while this time of year brings all the traditional elements, family, food, football, and even Black Friday, what I want to talk about today is really something much deeper, something richer, something that can change the way you experience both the good and the hard parts of life. I want to talk about gratitude, not just as a feeling, but as a choice. You see, we don't always feel thankful. Life doesn't always give us easy reasons to celebrate. But in Philippians chapter 4, the Apostle Paul, writing from a prison cell, points to something profound. Even in difficulty, we can choose gratitude, because when we do, we begin to see how much God is still providing. So today I want to walk through 5 things you can choose to be grateful for right now, right where you are. First, choose to be grateful for the people God has placed in your life. Paul begins this chapter by talking about the believers in Philippi, his friends, his spiritual family. He says they are his joy and crown. He calls them dear friends. These are people he loves deeply. And you know what? You and I, we have people too. People who've stood by us, people we've cried with, laughed with, grown with. No relationship is perfect. But if you look closely, you'll find that God has surrounded you with people who are part of his provision in your life, even in conflict. Paul shows us something powerful. He mentions a disagreement between 2 women in the church, Euodia and Syntyche, and urges them to be reconciled in the Lord. You see, he knew that broken relationships can drain joy from your life. So this week, look around. Who has God placed in your life? A friend, a spouse, a parent, a child, a brother or sister in Christ? Thank God for them. And if there's a wound or conflict, choose to pursue reconciliation and healing. Second, choose to be grateful for God's grace to endure hard things. Paul writes, "Rejoice in the Lord always. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition, present your requests to God." That's not just feel-good advice. Remember, he's writing under pressure from a prison cell to people facing persecution. But he knew something we often forget. Our circumstances don't get the final word. God does. You may be carrying burdens today, fear, uncertainty, loss, but Paul reminds us that we have a God who hears, a God who is near. And when we trust him with our anxiety, something supernatural happens. The peace of God begins to guard our hearts and minds. You won't always feel strong, but grace is not about how strong you feel. It's about who holds you up. Third, choose to be grateful for wisdom to live well. Paul continues saying, whatever is true, whatever is noble, think about such things. And then Paul says, whatever you've learned or received or heard from me, put it into practice. My friend, in a noisy, confused, divided world, God gives us the ability to think clearly, live wisely, and to walk faithfully. That's a gift worth noticing. And we don't have to live in reaction to fear or foolishness. We can seek truth. We can follow the example of those who have gone before us in faith. He has given us, that is God, He's given us the Bible from which we learn how to live rightly with Him. We learn who He is and how very much He loves us. And we can apply what we know, not just believe it, but actually live it. Gratitude helps us focus on what's right and choose what's wise. And that's how we begin to live well. Well, fourth, in looking at this Philippian passage, choose to be grateful for the ability to give of yourself and what you have. You know, generosity isn't just something we do when we're rich. It's something we do when we recognize how richly God has provided. The Philippians gave financially to support Paul's ministry, not because they had excess, but because they had hearts full of grace. And Paul thanks them, saying, "My God will meet all your needs according to His glorious riches in Christ Jesus." When we give our time, our energy, our resources, we're participating in the ongoing work of God's provision. And we're expressing our gratitude in action. We're saying, God, you've given me enough to share. You see, generosity is not loss, it's joy. It's living open-handed because we trust the one who provides. This week, the church I lead is giving to a special offering to support missions in the coming year. We're all challenged to give big. Over the years, our members have found that giving doesn't hurt. It feels great because when we give, we realize just how much we have received, and we see how God has caused us to abound so much that we get the joy of sharing. And finally, from this passage, we see that we're called to choose to be grateful for the perspective to be content. Paul says something that cuts through the noise of our culture. He says, I have learned to be content whatever the circumstances. He had experienced plenty and poverty, freedom and imprisonment. And yet he could say, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. True contentment doesn't come from having everything you want. It comes from knowing you already have everything you need. In Christ, as that great theologian Mick Jagger once said, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need. You know, gratitude helps us make that shift from entitlement to contentment, from craving more to trusting God's enough. So this week, you have a choice. In a world marked by tragedy, tension, and loss, you can choose to be grateful. Grateful for the people God has placed in your life. Grateful for the grace to endure what you've walked through and what you're walking through. Grateful for the wisdom to live well. And grateful for the ability to give. And grateful for the perspective to be content. This is how we live rich in the right things. This is how we live grateful because God is providing, even now. Thanks for spending time with me today. May your Thanksgiving be full, not just of food, but of faith, not just of family, but of perspective, and not just of tradition, but of genuine gratitude for what God is doing in your life. Happy Thanksgiving.